Okay. Why is it not showing from my page? I see it.
All right. We're here. We got everybody, got people joining in. Thank you for joining us. We have me, Torrance Green, Tay Berry, Interim Chief Harold Medina, his deputy Donovan Oliveira, and Roger Legendry. I think that's what we decided we're going to call you. I don't know if we figured out how to say your last name.
You got it. You got it right.
That'll work. We talked about it. We had our town hall last week, and I think it was a pretty good meeting, at least for a start. This is a good start. I keep telling everybody it's a nice foundation for us on building on the conversation. It was someplace, we have to start somewhere. And after that, we all decided, hey, let's have a conversation, let's kind of debrief from it, get into some of the details, and talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that's going on. So I guess we can get right into it. I don't know if you had anything you want to add, Tay?
No, I just thank everybody for joining.
Thank you. So, Tay, you had some questions. Did you want to jump off?
Yeah. So, let's just get right into it. I think the first question we had, I know you can't really dive much into it, but as we all know, there was a police shooting not long ago, and people want to know whatever you can say about the situation right now. More on the lines of why not more mental health to come out and answer these calls instead of an officer, or how does it
whatever you can say about the situation right now?
How does it go about an officer being called to the scene or someone with mental health being called to the scene to help someone?
Okay, that's a great answer. And I think the number one thing I want to talk about is I want to talk about two distinct topics here. The actual use of force and dealing with those individuals that are in mental crisis. And I think our settlement agreement with DOJ covers both of those areas where we have to be proficient. The number one thing that needs to occur for us to respond to this in a mental health capacity and to make sure that we get what we call an ECIT officer out there is the call has to be received in the sense that it is for somebody in mental health crisis. And that's some of the things we'll be looking into is exactly how this call was received. We have publicly stated that we did get a phone call that there was an individual running the streets. We'll have to look to see if that individual, if there is any other information, and if that would have been elevated to the point where it's now an individual in crisis and we're starting the proper resources out there. The other part to that is I do know that they've researched this individual and he wasn't found on any databases. And recently in the media, I think everybody's seen me really talk about how we have to get all the partners to the table. We all have to work as a community and a state. This individual had a police history, it seems, out of northern New Mexico. And the fact that we don't have a statewide database that helps us identify individuals that have had encounters with law enforcement that may be in mental crisis is a concern to me, and how we could all get on the same page. So that's one of the obstacles we have when an individual is visiting the city or doesn't have the proper history with the city for us to be able to identify them. The other question in terms of use of force and the actions of the officers, our officers are taught that if it's appropriate and they're able to, that they should de-escalate the situation and they should use less lethal as much as possible, or when feasible, before as one of the options before they use lethal force, to kind of put it very simple. And that night on the media briefing, I did discuss that in the background you could hear that a taser was cycling. And I just don't know if the investigation will have to show if they had more time to use that less lethal, or if anything interrupted the use of that less lethal. And one of the tough parts we have with a taser and sometimes individuals who are either homeless or during winter is that we have difficulties getting the penetration from the probes through the heavy clothing to a point where it's going to basically it's like a little fish hook where it's going to hook into the individual and it's going to incapacitate him the way the taser is trained. So there are a lot of reasons at various times that less lethal fails. That's probably one of the most widely known reasons why. And then also as an individual, on the video that I view that was on Facebook, you could see the individuals fully running, and you do have to be able to make that taser, that shot with the taser, and strike the individual with in a way that both prongs are deployed to the individual for maximum effect. So there's a variety of reasons. Taser, that shot with the taser.
And so let me ask you this, and I mean, however you can answer this. If it does come that there was excessive force or not enough done, those officers will be held accountable for their actions?
Yes. And I think it's good for everybody to understand how these investigations are conducted, because there's a lot of times that people don't understand that there's actually two investigations that are occurring when we have an officer-involved shooting. The first investigation is a criminal investigation. That's going to see if what the officers did crossed the line of criminality. And that case is presented to an independent reviewer, so to speak, that the district attorney's office hires to review it to see if the officer should be criminally charged. So that action of criminally charging the officer is actually outside of the authority of the Albuquerque Police Department. The Albuquerque Police Department conducts an administrative investigations to see if the actions of the officer were consistent with policy. So once they conduct that investigation, officer-involved shootings go to a process we call the Force Review Board. The Force Review Board was criticized recently under the Department of Justice 12th report, but they've also just notified us in recent weeks that they're very glad with the progress that the board has made and the accountability it's starting to show and the decisions it's making. So what the Force Review Board does is they look at it in the areas of, is there any training deficiencies? Is there any SOP violations? Were the supervisors on scene controlling the scene and the actions as they were supposed to? Was there any equipment needs the department had? And are there any policy issues that we should consider changing the policy? If in Force Review Board they note that a action wasn't caught during the investigation by the investigator in terms of an administrative violation, they could send it to get investigated for whatever they found. So we're looking at two investigations. One is completely independent of the police department. The officers that investigated are made from three agencies currently, and we're adding on hopefully in the near future Rio Rancho. So it's investigated by APD, Rio Rancho State Police, and BCSO. And then that goes to get reviewed by the criminal aspect, and then our Internal Affairs Force Division reviews the administrative portion if the officer followed policy. Does that explain that?
That's the process. It's one of the things that most people that we don't understand is what is the actual process. When something like this happens, I mean, it looks terrible. Optically, it's ugly. What is being done in the background is one of the big questions that most people actually have. A question I have that came up is with the use of non-lethal force. We're all human, so we know mistakes can be made. But is there a protocol? What is the usual, I guess, scenario? What do you guys expect to do when you use lethal force once and it doesn't work? Obviously, you know that the prongs are an issue with the tasers. What are other backups or recourses that can be done? And what is the protocol for attempting less lethal force more than once?
We do. Officers are authorized to use less lethal force more than once and use it as much as possible when feasible. We have different use of force, less lethal options. They start everywhere from, hands-on type activities where you're taking people down, you're pushing people, you're creating distance, all the way on up through. Then you advance to pepper spray, and the effect that has, kind of like the tear gassy type effect. And then it escalates to like batons. Then we have tasers, and we have what we call a 40 millimeter. which is a big, huge, basically a rubber bullet that is used to incapacitate or stop people's actions. And in our policy, when we know somebody is armed and that somebody has the potential for us to use deadly force, we're required to start what we call a force array. And a force array not only has one person who's dedicated to less lethal force, one person who's dedicated to lethal force, a supervisor to oversee it, but we also want a person there who's going to do the communication and the talking to the individual. And as many times as we're able to lawfully justify the use of less lethal force, we would recommend that. And just one other thing on top of all this, I don't know if people have tuned in on Facebook when we do our debriefings for officer-involved shootings, but I've been very supportive of us being very transparent. And as soon as we could clearly, without a doubt, say it's an officer-involved shooting, we've been putting it out in the media. And if you look back over the years, we've greatly increased from not saying anything till the first media briefing to within 10, 15 minutes as of late, we're indicating to using the media to put out the information that it was an officer-involved shooting. And once we get to a certain point of the investigation, we have a full briefing where our PIO and violent crimes gets together. They put together a presentation. They start at the beginning of the incident, how it came in. They'll release dispatch logs. They'll release the suspect's information. They'll release information on the officers. They will show the videos to the public that we obtained from the officer-involved shooting, and we're as fully transparent. We're as fully transparent as we can be in that process, because I think that's what happens a lot of times is the lack of information leads to a mistrust. And that's why I feel it's so important that we begin that dialogue of communication and we work with all the groups within the community to make sure they know that we have nothing to hide. And I think Tay and Torrance, you guys know that. You guys have continually asked me tough questions, and I'm always willing to give those answers because there has to be that level of transparency and trust amongst the community and law enforcement.
Guy got no fucks in the world. Look at him. Walking in the middle of the road. San Mateo. They're gonna they fucking tased him. Look, they're tasing him. Oh, they killed him. They killed him. They fucking killed him in front of me. What the fuck? They just shot him up. What the fuck? They just shot him up. Bro, look at, he's dead. These two cops just shot him up.